Philippe, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I made the mistake just before we started of saying, by the way, are you a PSG fan?
No, I'm not.
No. Avidly not. Distinctly not a fan.
Yes, you could say that. My club in France is Le Havre, who've just miraculously kept their place in the Ligue 1, but PSG, certainly this incarnation of PSG is not the club that is dearest to my heart. I used to go and watch them when I lived in Paris, but that was way before QSI bought the club, and they were a very different beast at the time. But no, I'm no fan. I'm no fan.
Would they have support all around France in the way that Juventus do?
In the way Juventus did outside of Milan, I think is probably the way to put it.
Sure, a few exceptions. But, you could get Juventus fans all over the country in Italy. Is it the same with PSG?
Well, PSG, I mean, I think in Marseille, they're basically putting candles, praying for an Inter win. But it's true that in France, people do not quite have the same kind of relationship with the clubs that they might have in other countries, such as in Germany, everybody's against Bayern unless they are Bayern, or in Italy, you're against Juventus unless you're Juventus, or you're against Inter and unless you're Inter. It doesn't quite work like that. There are a number of fans and media in particular who consider that should a club from your own country get to a major final, you should support that club, which of course is complete anathema to anybody who, for example, is following football from an English, British, or Spanish or Italian perspective. And in that particular case, yes, you will read quite a few people who are basically praying for a success of PSG in the Champions League final, which is, again, it's very French, where the club loyalties do not quite matter as much as what you feel for the national team in particular.
And I had even meant, actually, even just beyond Saturday, just in general life, could you just pop up in any French town around the country and you'll see some PSG jerseys around? The Glory Hunters I'm talking about.
Well, maybe not in Marseille, because that would be real provocation. Yeah. But I think in most other cities, absolutely, you would see that. And the thing which is quite remarkable is that when PSG play in other stadiums around France, you will see people that you would never see at the home games of those clubs. And some of them might actually, I mean, they'll be a bit careful, but some of them might actually be wearing PSG shirts, or they will have come specifically to watch PSG and its star players. And it's quite unusual, I have to say. I wouldn't say that they're universally loved, but they're not universally disliked as either. They do have a following elsewhere, not just in Paris.
So, I can only speak for myself, but I suspect others have gone through an interesting journey in our relationship with PSG in recent times. I suppose there's not much to admire about the ownership, and that remains. Mm-hmm. And at some period in the late 10s and early 20s, the peak being when Mbappe, Neymar and Messi were watching their teammates run around and not helping, they were very, very easy to have a lot of disdain for. And now along comes Luis Enrique, and I can't help but quite like the team.
Yep, I think we're all in the same situation here, because at least from the new year onwards, because we have to remember that in the autumn they were absolutely rubbish. They really struggled. That's the team that lost at Arsenal. That's the team which had problems absolutely everywhere. That's the team where Dembele was actually taken out of the squad for disciplinary reasons. It wasn't working. And then something clicked in January. And from then onwards, they became this rather beautiful, can we say that?
Yeah.
Yes, beautiful team to watch, with probably one of the best, if not the best midfield in European football, with very young players who have a lot of talent. Mendes, my goodness, what a player. But also Barcola, but also Désiré Doué. Not only that, but who are also very much team players who can can mix the spectacular and the imaginative with at the same time the kind of desire to work for the team that you would see in far less talented players, shall we say. And Kvaratskhelia is a typical example of that, who has been absolutely immense since he arrived from Italy in the winter transfer window, and has been actually one of the main initiators of this transformation as a player. And I don't think that you can possibly I don't think you can hold it against Luis Enrique that what is achieved is remarkable, because he hasn't achieved that with splashing his owners' money, as has been the case before. Because before Neymar and before Messi and before Mbappe, we also had David Beckham. We also had Zlatan Ibrahimovic. That was the policy of the club, which has changed radically. He's managed to convince his owners that was the way to go, with younger players, hungrier players. And the football he's made this team play has been just exceptional in so many ways, in terms of organization, tactical organization, in terms of, especially, I think, for me, one of the most amazing things is the way that the ball can circulate within the team at high speed at times is just insane. And it's not random. It's genuinely the product of a lot of work done on the training ground. It's also the product of players who are suddenly playing at their absolute peak and who have been put together in a cohesive whole with a W. Whereas before that, you could take the W out. And who have just, this is why people are talking about Vitinha being, perhaps the best midfielder of his type in Europe at the moment. Why people are even talking about the great Barcelona midfields of the late 2000s, early 2010s under Pep Guardiola, when they're comparing it to this PSG midfield. So you cannot help but being seduced by that team. That doesn't mean you should forget about where they come from and what the club itself is representative of. And I don't think, it's a situation in which I think many football fans find themselves in the 21st century, where you have to dissociate, even though perhaps you shouldn't, what you see on the pitch with what is happening in the boardroom and elsewhere. But the way in which PSG have done it makes it easier, I suppose, for the neutral than, for example, for Manchester City, where the fingerprints of the ownership are absolutely everywhere. PSG, you can think of them as being this club which was winning all those titles at home, always failing at the last hurdle, blah, 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 who were just a project by a nation state. Some would call it sports washing. There are many other words to call it. But then suddenly what happens with Luis Enrique and this group of players is quite different from what we've been used to coming from nation states investing in football. It's not all just, superstars and the rest of it. It's about genuinely good footballers and a genuinely good manager playing the best football that I think has been offered in Europe this year. So that's why we're all a little bit, I think we're all like that, because when you see the final, and it's really, I have to say, that's the kind of final you really look forward to, because the opposition in styles between the two clubs is extraordinary between the two teams, and that we are hoping for a kind of remake of what we saw in the semis, certainly in the semi against Barcelona by Inter. But you cannot quite, if they were to lift the trophy, it would be the combination of a project that in itself is, I would even call it abhorrent project by the Qatari state, but it will also be a reward for an exceptional team composed of exceptional players with an exceptional manager at their head.
Yes, it's all quite
which makes it very much more complicated and ambiguous as a proposition. It's like when Manchester City played in the final, that nobody was asking themselves this kind of question, regardless of how much you liked or didn't like Manchester City's style of play. They were just there. They were Abu Dhabi Football Club. This PSG team feels different for some reason, but maybe that's the trick, the greatest trick that this kind of devil has ever played on us.
I had the experience with PSG this year of watching them against Arsenal. and coming in
Yeah.
here on the record telling everyone, well, that's a disaster. You don't need to worry about them. And the next time I saw PSG in a full 90 minutes was at home to Liverpool, and it was jaw-droppingly sensational. They
Yeah.
destroyed Liverpool. It was the best performance of this entire European season. And
Yeah.
what the hell has happened here was the obvious question. Um, what do you think has prompted this shift towards players, in effect, that the manager can control and sculpt? Did the Qataris see the errors of their way, that kind of immature approach of just getting the biggest names and paying them the most money? Or did they kind of just give up and this has kind of happened by accident? Was it a very conscious move towards Enrique being allowed to control a team?
Hmm. Um, no, I don't think this is the combination of a great strategy. I think there's a bit of luck involved in there. And the luck is that Kylian Mbappe went to Real Madrid, is that suddenly they were not held into, almost as hostages to stardom as they had been for so long. Neymar had gone to finish his career, I mean, disastrous end to that career, which could have been sublime, but there you go. Messi decided to do his thing at Inter Miami. He wasn't there any longer. So there was Kylian. But Kylian was very much Kylian, as in you could not imagine for 1 second the current team that we have, PSG, playing with Kylian or the Kylian Mbappes that we saw with PSG in the previous 7 years. You just can't imagine that. It would be impossible. And the thing is that I'm not sure that Kylian Mbappe is somebody who is adapted to the type of management and tactical demands that Luis Enrique puts on his players, where there are no passes, so to speak, given because you happen to be a great player. Look at Desiré Doué. Think of him and of the raw talent. For me, I've said it before, I'll say it again. He's a more complete footballer than Mbappe was at the same age. Absolutely no doubt in my mind
Right.
about it. None. And Barcola doesn't quite have the same potential, I think. He's still a very, very fine player. But he does have this work ethic as well. And then suddenly they found themselves, I think, because the Kylian Mbappe saga, remember, it was not just last summer, it was the summer before that and the summer before that. There's always been this kind of, is he going to go? Is he going to extend his contract? What's going to happen? And so it was impossible for anybody who was in charge at PSG to know exactly what to do. This time, for the first time, PSG has a problem. Their star player, the guy who's been scoring all those goals, making all these assists for them, is gone. So what have they got to do? And he cannot be replaced. You just cannot replace Kylian Mbappe just like that. So what you do, you actually have a very fine coach and you give him a chance. And you give him a chance because, to be honest, you don't have a lot of alternatives. And at the beginning, it doesn't go too well, but at least he's able to work in the kind of environment that he has defined for himself and for his players. And the result of that is that, yes, in disciplinary matters, he takes this very strong decision for Ousmane Dembélé, which I think is one which was perhaps pivotal in the season, and suddenly unlocks the potential in that player, who until then was seen as the man who could dribble past five players and then sky the ball 20 yards over the bar, or forget that he had a teammate who was there with just a few centimeters from the goal line and have a go himself. And then suddenly we've got this guy who's turned into an absolutely lethal striker, who is also showed now he's able to drop and to play as a kind of 9.5, almost 10 in some situations. So suddenly you realize, oh, yeah, actually, he's a very good player. But that's what he's been doing for months during the autumn. And then again, I insist on that. You've got this absolute marvel of a player called Kvaratskhelia, who arrives from Napoli, and who is the epitome of the Luis Enrique approach to football, as in, you have imagination, use it. You have courage on the ball, use it. But don't forget to track back. don't forget to be there where you're supposed to be on dead ball situations, and so on and so forth. And which is exactly what the Georgian player is like. And the result of that, and the fact that he found this ideal combination in midfield again, which is I don't know these three guys. It's like watching a living organism made of three different bodies, and to see them move together. It's the old thing that trainers used to do and probably still do when you tie a rope against the waist around the waists of your players to make sure that they maintain certain shapes, particularly a straight shape if you're defending offside and the rest of it. But these guys, the rope is like more of an elastic up to a point, but they're always perfectly placed with each other so that there's always, and that's one thing I've really noticed the most about PSG, is that every time someone has the ball, there is always two or three teammates who will do this small run. Actually, it's not a run, it's just they will walk 2-3 yards from where they are to offer angles of passing which were not available. And you know what? There's also other guys a bit further down the field. They're also doing the same thing, and they're positioning themselves just in case one of the bases of the triangle decides to go to them. Which is why it makes for me for an absolutely fascinating and fascinatingly beautiful spectacle. Because what we see is a living organism. And that's exactly what I saw against PSG. But I also saw that later. I mean, I saw that against Villa, perhaps not throughout the two legs. And I saw that against Arsenal as well. And perhaps not all of the time, but when they click, my goodness, it's a beautiful machine to watch, because there is nothing mechanical about that machine. It's actually it's very human, and which sounds a bit paradoxical, but perhaps in this lies a part of the attractions of this PSG side.
Yes. What's so striking, of course, is that Luis Enrique, at the departure of Mbappe, completely saw all of this coming. He said, I'd rather have four players, this is at the time, I'd rather have four players who score 12 goals each than one who scores 40. He said, this team will play better next year. I'm going to control everything that happens on the pitch. I mean, so there it was, signposted, we're going to be just fine. There's something, I don't want to beatify him, and I don't know him terribly well, but what I do know of Enrique, I find very likeable. You know, he has spoken very movingly with great kind of equanimity about the death of his 9-year-old daughter, which is kind of a pain you can't even imagine enduring.
No.
Her body is gone, but she hasn't died. She's still with us. And there's a video on YouTube where, again, it's so moving, where he goes to visit his mother, and she has no photos of Zana, his daughter, up. And she says, it's too painful. I can't. And he says, you must, and we have to celebrate her, remember her. And, it's so beautiful. So he's probably a special person in that respect. But then, he walks the training ground barefoot every morning to reconnect with something deeper. Very strict on his body, I was reading, less emotive, but stretches every 30 minutes at training, every 30 minutes, and has all sorts of bars and straps hanging from his ceilings and his walls. And he does look very lithe when you see him. During the World Cup in Qatar, I guess a lot of people would have seen him with his kind of, looks like he was taking a pizza delivery headphones, answering questions from the public. Everything from why the team were playing a certain way to why he slept naked. I mean, a wide spectrum of questions answered. So an interesting fella. How has he been received amongst the French public, or what do you make of him?
At the beginning, I think that people didn't really know much about him, to be honest. I don't think that the response to him was immediately positive or unanimously positive, but things have changed since then. And because he's done something that nobody else had been able to do before him in that crazy club. And when we're talking about the people who came before him, we're not talking exactly about bad managers, are we? We're talking about people like, Carlo Ancelotti, for Christ's sake, one of the great managers in history. We're talking about Unai Emery, who was so close to do it, with PSG. People always forget that That game against Barcelona, that was a one-off. It was never going to happen twice or three. It would never. You would play 10 times. It would only happen once. It just so happened. And that he was in no way responsible for the fact that his players suddenly went brain dead on the pitch. That's not his fault. That was not him. It was not a tactical decision. And so he's taken on a mantle that some very, very, very fine managers, I mean, you could even say great managers, were not able to wear with the same kind of grace and with the same ability to mold the team, but also the perception of the club in his own image. And he didn't do that because of a grand plan and, playing to the gallery or whatever. It was just himself, I think. And he has just applied the method that he believed in. He's an incredibly emotional man, as you have seen. And I think that has transferred well to his players. He also made an interesting choice in as much that he trusted young players. And I think that was a key part in his success,
Okay.
because they would be far more receptive to what he had to tell them and what he would ask from them. And he would ask an awful, awful lot than players who were actually established. So the ones who are established that he could count on are players like Marquinhos. But Marquinhos is, he is PSG. He's the link between various incarnations of this team, and he's the one that, if you asked a PSG fan today, they would consider him to be one of the greatest players who's ever put on their shirt. But that goes from way beyond, he's been there all his life. But he can use that. But the other players, when you look at them, you think, my goodness, they're genuinely his players. And you cannot have, and I think people I've realized that in France, because there was a certain I wouldn't, coldness, actually, yes, let's use the word coldness towards him. Because of the language barrier, things like that. And also because of the way he projects, which can be very intense, cannot it? He can look a bit frightening, actually, at times. And then they realized who he was and how good he was. And now I think there is utmost respect for the man and for the manager. And rightly so.
Very good. So I guess we see how this game goes on Saturday, and it's really hard to call for sure.
Impossible.
Yeah.
Impossible to call.
Not to
and the managerial as well clash is just fascinating between the two. I mean, everything. I have to say I haven't looked forward to a Champions League final for a very, very long time.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think that the semi-finals we had were actually what we've had since the beginning of the knockout rounds has been absolutely exceptional. And there have been great games through every single round, and the semi-finals were something else. Yeah. They were, the quality of some of the football was insane. And but if I had to make a choice, I guess I would still go for the Italians.
Why is that, Philippe?
I think they've got a response and an answer to every question that can be posed to them. I think that whatever is required of them, they'll do it. I also think they're more solid. I think PSG do have some frailties, and we know that. You can play in their back. I do think that Inter is actually quite well equipped to do that. And perhaps that's the heart speaking a little bit, even though Inter is not a club that I wholeheartedly support. But what they've done this season, I think, has been in many ways even more remarkable than what PSG has done. And even if they lost the title in Serie A because of Scott McTominay, the overhead kick, it's not exactly something as well you could have predicted a few months ago. I think that I think it's just personal preference, because, to be honest, when it comes to the pitch, it's 50-50, 51-49. It's Brexit, basically. You cannot predict it.
Okay, very good. Well, thanks so much. We look forward to it. And as you said, it kind of just can't be a bad game, you would think. I know I've jinxed it just there, but it probably can't be. I wouldn't
No,
think.
it can be. I mean, the one thing I would say for PSG is that normally, if something had happened under the previous regime or with a different manager, there would have been an awful lot of tension around the team and around the club in the week leading up to the final, and this hasn't been the case at all. They are so relaxed; it's quite unbelievable how relaxed they are. They just won the French Cup, at a canter, of course, but the players are fit, healthy. Um, Achraf Hakimi went to Roland Garros to enjoy some tennis.
Okay.
That's his way to prepare himself. They've had a few light training sessions. It's all been about recuperation and taking it easy. So it's not at all the kind of atmosphere that you would have
Yeah.
thought would be the case before a big final like that. And I think and Luis Enrique as well doing this. That's like, guys, come on, it's just a football game. Enjoy yourselves. It's a big game. We know that. I don't need you to tell that, but just take it easy for the time being and then enjoy it when the day comes. And which makes me think, yes, we're going to have an absolutely magnificent final.
Okay. Sounds good. Philippe Auclair, pleasure as always. Thank you.
Thank you.